Chapter 1. Mr. Marcus Tierney had never considered himself a coward. That is, until today. He looked up at the grey stone house and tugged at his collar. It still felt imposing, even all these years later. He raised his hand to the knocker, but then dropped it and took a step back. What if Margaret was within? Or even worse, Isabel? Perhaps he could send someone on this errand. Was that not precisely why he had a steward? He shook his head and retook the steps he had given up. No. He was being chicken-livered, and he was not a coward. Margaret had married and was living in Dorset, so the chances she was here were slim. In truth, it was doubtful any of the family was at home. They were likely in London. Or was that just hopeful thinking? The thought of Isabel in London relaxed his shoulders slightly. He could face Lord Haverley, as awkward as it would be. But Isabel was another story. What would he say to her? Marcus had heard very little of her over the years, which was odd, considering her father and his position in the Lords. But then, he had worked hard not to hear of her, so he really should not be surprised. He clenched his fists at his side. If he was to run his estate, he needed to get over this insecurity? Guilt? He did not know exactly what to call it, but whatever it was, it had to end. And now. Marcus raised his hand and dropped the knocker several times. Straightening to his full height, he thrust out his chin, but that did not feel right. He clasped his hands behind his back and turned his head slightly to the side, assuming an air of aloofness. There. That was better. This carefree look was what he was comfortable with. After all, it was the reputation that had preceded him for all these years, earned or not. His brows knit together and his lips puckered, his entire body sagging. If only carefree was the worst of the false characterizations that dogged his heels. The door opened, and Gerrit, the Palmer's long-time butler, stared back at him. Marcus straightened again, but it was too late. The butler had already seen him slouched and lacking. Marcus twisted his head slightly to the side and smiled, trying to regain a small amount of the composure he had felt before the door opened. It was not much of a smile, but it was what he offered most people. A slight uptick of his lips, one which was difficult to discern if one was not looking for it. It was all most people deserved. He waited for the butler to acknowledge him. Gerrit stood in the doorway, staring at Marcus. "May I help you, sir?" Marcus frowned. Did the man really not recognise him, or was he simply being obtuse? It had only been a handful of years since last Marcus was at Montrose. Prior to that final encounter, he had been at Montrose at least twice a week for most of his life. It was not as if Marcus was so changed in his appearance as to be a stranger to the butler. Marcus looked the servant up and down, assessing him. Yes, he was the same old Gerrit. The man knew precisely who Marcus was. Still, Marcus withdrew a card from his pocket and handed it over. "I need to speak to Lord Haverley if he is at home. It is concerning the south pasture." Gerrit handed the card back to Marcus. "Matters of the estate should be addressed to Mr. Randolph." Gerrit moved to close the door, but Marcus quickly reached forward and placed his hand on the wood, keeping it from closing any farther. "Does that mean the Earl is at home? There are other matters I need to discuss with him, Gerrit. Please let him know I am here." The last part was not entirely true. But if Lord Haverley was at home, Marcus wished to make him aware of the situation himself. Besides, if he was to mend the trouble between them, he needed to speak to the Earl. The older man narrowed his eyes at Marcus. 5 years, it seemed, was not enough time to erase what had happened. Marcus should have realised as much, but it had been such a long time ago. And Margaret had married well. Did that not erase the past? The wind picked up, blowing leaves and dirt around Marcus's boots. Winter was not leaving without a fight. "Gerrit, why are you allowing the gentleman to remain outside in this weather? Do invite him into the warmth while you size him up." Marcus's heart stopped for at least 2 beats. Or maybe it sped up. He was uncertain. So focused he was on the voice within. "Izzy,"